Hello, I am Kenneth Kelty, your host of Exceeding Expectations with Kenneth Kelty. I am a person with autism, intellectual, and developmental disabilities. I am an award-winning motivational speaker and activist. In my work, I advocate for self-determination by sharing my life with disabilities. Today, I have the pleasure of having my friend Tim Villegas from Think Inclusive, who also helped me during my StarTech fellowship with podcasting. It's all it's always a pleasure to hear from community members who are also podcasts as well. Tim, you can give an introduction about yourself. Huh? Like anyone to hear?
Sure. Kenneth, thanks for having me on. Exceeding expectations. I really appreciate it. So I am the Chief Growth Officer at the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education. I've been with MCIE since 2020, and like Kenneth said, I've been podcasting for a while, since 2012 when I was a classroom teacher. I started the podcast, and now this is just something I do for work. So it's great. It's great to keep on podcasting and keep talking about inclusion.
And it's great to hear stories about inclusion as it is a very important topic. Always to keep up with. And he's just actually gone to a great point about one of the first questions. How did you choose Thiessen?
How did I choose teaching? I didn't want to be a teacher first. I had no intention of being a teacher. I wanted to be a psychologist or a um, like a marriage family therapist. Um, my interests were in psychology, how the brain works, in how we discovered how to discover how to become a better person, to live with more empathy, and those are the things that drove me. I had no intention of going into teaching at all. How that happened was I graduated with a psychology degree, and I did a little substitute teaching uh, towards the end of my college career. And also, I took classes where I went into schools to do observations. And I had no idea that I would even like going into public school because I went to private school. I thought there were vastly different things, and so it was through that exposure of being in public school and going, oh, I really like working with kids. I like working with families. And right out of college, I got a job as a behavioral therapist for um, it was called the Autism Verdugo Hills Autism Project, and it was working with families of young children on the spectrum and doing like one-on-one therapy in their homes and sometimes in school. And so, back in the day, um, I learned about discrete trial training and ABA techniques. Not something that I would do now, just because I know how harmful those practices can be, and certainly some experiences. So, it was I have a different perspective now. Um, but I did realize that I really enjoyed working with children, autistic children. And so I decided to go back to school and get my teaching credential. And and that's how I got into teaching. I really, again, had no intention. I either wanted to be a psychologist or I wanted to be a musician. And I tried that for a little bit and did not get paid for that. So I decided to go into something a little bit more stable.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, it's definitely great to hear about how sometimes one path can lead into another direction. I do come from a long line of educators in my family. But yeah, I definitely love the advocacy round and that and yes, psychology is definitely great to help people when it's the right path you do want to be on. Thank you. And I have enjoyed the Think Inclusive podcast and kudos that you have been able to sustain it for almost 14 years now. How did your interests with how did your interactions with families and the TSIN lead to the Think Inclusive podcast?
Yeah, great question. I My career led to the Think Inclusive podcast by really being obsessed with radio. Let's, let's just put it that way. So I'm, being a teacher and was and is fantastic. Working with families is wonderful. I also was trying to find a creative outlet. And so early in my career, I wanted to start a podcast, but I just didn't know how to do it. And the technology isn't like it is today. Today, like pretty much anyone can start a podcast, no problem. There's lots of different tools out there for you to start one and get one going. But back in the 2010s, I suppose, is a little bit more difficult. And so I had to do some workarounds and get some special software and really learn how to record phone calls. And so after I got over those barriers, I just really, like I said, loved radio. I loved, and I still do, love NPR. Love listening to interviews and like Fresh Air is a radio program that I still love. And that's what I was imagining was having these long conversations with people doing the work of inclusive education and then being able to share that with the world. So I think one of my first guests was Nicole Eridix, who is a inclusive education consultant originally from Canada, who moved to California. And she's written a number of books. She has a blog called The Inclusive Class, and she also had a podcast. And so I said, well, wouldn't it be great if I interviewed Nicole? And so I emailed her and said, hey, would you want to come on? I'm starting a podcast. And she said, absolutely. And that's kind of where it started. Just at kitchen table with my little computer and you know internet and I started recording phone calls on Skype, if anyone remembers what Skype is, and then I would download the audio files and put them in GarageBand and edit them like a radio show. And then I found a place to upload them, and then voila, I had a podcast. And it was pretty infrequent at first. So, right now we're about weekly. We publish a weekly episode. Back then, it was maybe 1 or 2 months between episodes, and I didn't really get serious about podcasting consistently until probably 2017 or 2018. So for the first few years, it was just whenever I got around to it. Um, but I got a lot of really great feedback, and it was something I really enjoyed. So I just kept at it and kept at it and kept at it. And that's what I know that I've told you this, Kenneth, and anyone else out there who's thinking about starting a podcast is, it is a labor of love, and you do it because you love what you want to talk about, and um, you just keep going and keep producing episodes, and the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. It is definitely a labor of love. And yes, I do love documentaries, and I have always loved history, so I can definitely relate to one to create the kind of content that I want to see, like what Liz Weintraub and I talked about a couple years ago.
Yeah.
When we were also on your podcast, and I do remember Skype. I remember having that while I was at Western Carolina, but we definitely have a lot more software out there now than what we did in the 2010s. So definitely
Hmm.
kudos to all of the progress that we have made more recently. I know he's talked about Nicole, and I'm glad she was a great starter, but definitely talk about a favorite interview that you have done, huh? Interviews.
Favorite interviews. That's a difficult question, Kenneth, because every episode feels like it's like a one of my children. So it's hard to pick a favorite. But one of the most interesting interviews I had was with Temple Grandin, and that was a few years ago. And Temple, if you don't know her, she there was a HBO movie made after her life. She's written a number of books. She's pretty well known in the autism community, and it was a it was an honor to speak with her. What made that interview really interesting was that I had just gotten a puppy, Jupiter, who is actually sleeping. Wait, is he? Oh, yeah, he's sleeping on my bed back there. You can't really see him on my camera, but he's sleeping on my bed. And we had just gotten Jupiter. He was just a tiny puppy, and I was working from home, and we had scheduled this interview months before we had gotten the puppy. And since I was home alone, there was no one to watch the puppy. So um, I had to navigate having this conversation with Temple and a puppy running all around, like on my back and climbing on me and making a bunch of noise and whining and whimpering. and and what was so great about it is Temple had, she knows animals very well, and so we talked about that. I had just gotten a puppy, and she had no problem whatsoever. Um, with the distractions and having I had to stop quite a few times and try to get it back on track and stuff like that, and she had she was like, whatever, it's totally fine. And she even asked me some questions about Jupiter, and that was probably one of my most memorable ones because I was so stressed out thinking, oh my gosh, Temple is probably really annoyed at me, but she was absolutely fine. So that was, you know, I that was definitely one of my most memorable interviews.
Yes, Temple Grandin is amazing. I did enjoy her HBO movie back in 2010. Next year actually will be 10 years when I first had the measure of meeting Dr. Temple Grandin when she was at the NC State School of Veterinarian
Hmm.
Sciences. She is very amazing with her advocacy and being around back when autism was fought very differently versus how it would be today.
So true.
Now, how can we encourage storytelling at a young age?
Another great question, Kenneth. I never thought of myself as a storyteller, and even after all these years of producing the podcast, I think that I have a hard time describing myself as a storyteller, but what I that's definitely what I do and what I try to do. And it's always something that I am very intentional about is how to tell a story. And so I think as far as, you know, storytelling and encouraging it at a young age, I think we need to continue to read like picture books and stories to children to activate their imagination and to help them tell their own stories. So I think, you know, whether a story is true or not true, um, you know, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you can still tell a great story. And a lot of times, the stories that you tell, even if they aren't true, if they're based in understand of the audience's understanding, they can still teach you, and you can still learn lessons from those stories. Um, there's a story that I'm not going to tell it verbatim, but there's a story that we like to tell about twins with significant disabilities, and one is Sally, and one is Regina. And Sally and Regina um, are twins, and one went to a school where she was segregated. So that would be Sally. So Sally went to a school. She was in segregated, self-contained classes all throughout her whole, you know, from preschool all the way up through college. She barely had any time with her peers. She barely had any time with regular or general curriculum. Um, she hardly ever went out into the real world to, you know, to experience anything. And and so she fell farther and farther and farther behind. And so by the time she graduated from high school, she was put in a like adult care facility and lived out the rest of her life in that facility. Well, her sister, her twin sister, Regina, Regina went to a regular classroom from preschool all the way through high school, attended her neighborhood school, was with her peers, learned everything that everyone else learned. Um, Sometimes she didn't get as good of grades as everyone else, but she was still exposed to everything, and she, you know, went to birthday parties, and she had friends, and she lived a life that was not segregated. And now she's an adult and um, is supported in a workplace that is attuned to her strengths. And so, as I'm telling this story, you can imagine Sally and Regina, right? You can imagine what their life would be like, and you can imagine maybe even what they like their personalities. You can imagine what they might look like. Sally and Regina are not real, right? They're made up. This is a made up story. But as I'm telling the story, you are thinking about Sally, you're thinking about Regina, and you're thinking about, you know, what their life is like, right? Because that's the power of storytelling. And the other thing is, you know, Sally and Regina may not be real in my story, but there are Sally and Reginas in real life that experience life in segregated and inclusive spaces. So it's not that far off. So that is why storytelling is so important, because you can really get a point across if you use story as the vehicle, and and if you keep practicing it and you get good at it, then your advocacy is just that much more powerful. Um, I wasn't planning on telling that story, but it's deep in my brain, so I went ahead and told that anyways.
I'm I'm now thinking, yeah, that was definitely a great story, and yes, definitely learning the skills about storytelling from a young age is very very important. Now, how do you define storytelling within connection with nothing about us without us.
I think for the I think so. I'm just going to bring it back to the story of Sally and Regina. I think that anytime you're telling a story, especially about people with disabilities, that you have to bring in the lived experience of those with disabilities. And I'm confident now. I do not live with a particular disability, and I certainly am not speaking for anyone that has a particular disability. Um, but I do have people that I know that have told their stories to me and um, have helped me understand where they are coming from. And so the best that I can do is to bring in those people that I have met and have listened to and their lived experience and have that inform the stories that I'm telling. But what I would say to anyone that's listening is that you are your own, best storyteller, right? So if you have an experience that is connected to disability rights, justice, or advocacy, then go ahead and tell that story because that is your lived experience, and we need that story in the world. We need people to hear your story. So that is how I would that's how I would connect the two to make sure that number one, I'm not speaking for people with disabilities because that is not my identity. Um, but to make sure that you are listening and understanding the perspective of people who do have that lived experience.
Yes, yes, I agree. Definitely hearing from the lived experience community is very important, whether it's through disability advocacy and just your experiences growing up. That's why it needs to be consistent and hearing from the person rather than from someone who's not going to understand. Now, advice you would give to future podcast hosts.
So I think that the best advice I can give to any podcaster is to just keep podcasting. Um, the more you create and the more that you hit publish and the more people you talk to, that it's just the more and more you do the craft of podcasting, the better you will get at it. And it will also help you know if you still want to keep podcasting because I think there's no shame in well, I started a podcast and I got 10 episodes into it and it's really hard and I don't know if I'm up for this. And there's no shame in saying, okay, well, I did what I needed to do and I am ready to move on to another thing. Um, there, you know, I think there's a misconception about podcasting that you just start podcasting and then you just never stop. Like eventually Think Inclusive will end. Like eventually it will no longer be a podcast. I'm not saying that it's going to happen soon or anything. I'm just saying eventually, like all podcasts, will run its course, and that's fine. Maybe something else will come out of it, or a new project or something different. But I would just say if you're a podcaster, give yourself grace, give yourself time, and understand that the creative process is all part of the journey of figuring out who you are and how you want to advocate in this world. So just keep going and get those reps in, and you'll be fine.
Yes, I agree. Definitely keep going. As I know, I have seen from people that they wanted to start, they did, but it was just so much. But it was so much work, and that does go to a good point. How yes, you want to go for a long, long time, but like anything in life, sometimes it may come to an end, and or sometimes it's just good where it was a great ride for content that maybe just needs to be listened to for future listeners who who may be interested in learning about the fight that it took.
Mhm.
Now, I definitely do enjoy the Think Inclusive and the blogs goals for continuing it for the future on and beyond. Yeah.
Yeah, so we just celebrated our 13th year of producing the podcast and the blog, and we are planning for season 14, which is coming up. Our season usually runs from around September through July, and then we take a month or two off, depending on how it goes. So we are planning for season 14 to start in September of 2026. And we already have lots of people lined up for our next season. And um, goals, I would think I would like to, I guess I would like to have a greater diversity of guests and try to bring in, additional perspectives. I think we talk a lot. We have a lot of people with disabilities on. We have family members, and we want to focus on people who are doing the work of inclusive education in their schools and districts. And I think that there's a lot of people out in the world doing this work that we just don't even know about. And so, what I would love is if anyone's listening and you're an educator and you are pursuing inclusive practices in your school or district, and even if you're at the beginning of your journey, I think that people need to hear your story. So um, that's where I want even more of stories and voices to come from is the people actually doing that work. So hopefully we will fulfill that vision for this next season.
Yes, I am sure you'll definitely be able to continue that in the next season because it's always great to be able to hear from other people and give voices to people who may not have all the resources or the platforms to be able to share about to hear about all the different inclusive practices that are out there. Now I'd like to give you a chance. Is there anything else you'd like to share here?
Well, I really appreciate you having me on, Kenneth, and I wish the I wish all the luck and the good wishes to you and all the people you have on your podcast and all of your listeners. Um, and if you want to learn more about Think Inclusive or our organization, the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education, you can go to mcie.org and learn about what we do and how we support schools and districts.
You are welcome, and thank you. It's definitely been a pleasure having you on here, and good luck with your future podcast goals. You can find Think Inclusive on Spotify and YouTube, and be sure to listen. Keep going beyond expectations, and don't be discouraged if you try podcasting and it may not be your thing. Keep going beyond expectations. Here. This is your host from Exceeding Expectations with Kenneth Kelty. Go above expectations